My daughter Emma, who is approaching her due date, suddenly doubled over in pain from labor. My grandson John unexpectedly threw a bucket of ice water at her. The splash echoed throughout the room, and for a few seconds, everything fell silent. Emma's clothes were soaked and water dripped on the floor. It didn't look like an accident. John appeared to deliberately throw the cold water. My husband and I were stunned by the unexpected act and left speechless, unable to comprehend what had just happened in front of us. "Hello, what do you think you are doing?" I scolded him, but John just stood there, holding the bucket, looking perplexed, as if he had no idea why he was being yelled at. Then John said something almost unbelievable. "But Daddy always claims it is a spell to make Mommy feel better. What have you just said?" My husband and I were both taken aback, but we didn't have time to focus on John's explanation at the time. John looked worried for Emma, who was clutching her stomach in pain and appeared to be about to cry. What exactly was John thinking when he did that? It wasn't the kind of prank that could be easily dismissed, and he didn't appear to be young enough to pull such a stunt at such a critical moment. After Emma had safely given birth and regained her strength, I brought up the incident that occurred prior to our departure for the hospital. What did John mean? Emma looked at me, her face filled with unease. She appeared hesitant to speak, but after seeing the seriousness in my eyes, she realized she couldn't hide it any longer. "Mom, my name is Nancy. I live with my husband, Jason. We're both retired and enjoying peaceful days together. Nancy, shall we go out soon?" Now that we're in our late 60s, even a short trip leaves us exhausted. And I noticed I was out of breath after climbing stairs. We've made dietary changes, but progress has been slow. So, to combat our physical decline, we recently began going to the gym together. When you think of a gym, you typically envision young people. However, after some research, we discovered that there are many gyms that cater to seniors. In fact, when we go, we meet a lot of people our age. We started going when the mornings and evenings were still cool, but now that the heat has intensified, we've established a routine. As we arrived at the gym and were about to start our usual workout, we noticed a familiar face. Cassie. "Good morning. How are you doing today?" Nancy. Jason. "Good morning. I'm feeling great today. I am ready to get some exercise in." Cassie is about our age, and we often make small talk when we see each other. We first met when we were having trouble using the gym equipment, and Cassie kindly showed us how to use it. Since then, we've become close friends, discussing everything from our workout routines to minor events in our lives. Cassie's cheerful and smiling demeanor gives us a boost of energy at our age. Life tends to follow a predictable pattern, and new friendships are rare. But since we started going to the gym, we feel like we've discovered a new way to enrich our lives. We enjoyed our conversation with Cassie and resumed our workout. "Nancy, shall we go into Emma?" "How soon?" After eating lunch and taking a short break. We had arrived at the gym, and before we knew it, the heat of the day had subsided. Our daughter Emma, who is currently pregnant with her second child, lives nearby, and her due date is approaching. We intend to visit her today to check on her, after working out in the gym. We made our way to Emma's house and rang the doorbell. The sound of small footsteps running towards the door echoed from inside. "Welcome, Lily. Grandma and Grandpa are here." Since it was a Sunday, I assumed he was off from daycare. Our grandson John greeted us with a big smile. He has Emma's gentle eyes and is a loving, charming child. Looking past John, I noticed Emma walking slowly with her large belly to the door. "Dad and Mom, thank you for coming. How have you been?" "Of course, we've been doing well. We went to the gym together again today. I understand that being pregnant and raising a young child can be difficult, but Emma always greets us warmly and is thoughtful and kind. Her belly had grown significantly since we last saw her. We were eagerly anticipating the arrival of another grandchild." Despite the fact that it was the weekend, I noticed Emma's husband, Harrison, was not present. He must have been out somewhere. "By the way, Emma, is Harrison at the slots again?" Emma responded with a vague smile. "Yes, I believe he should return soon." According to Emma, her husband Harrison is an elite employee who rose to a high position at a young age. His superiors hold him in high regard, and his subordinates enjoy working with him. He has a good reputation as a father, but he also enjoys gambling and spends the majority of his free time at the slot machines. My husband and I frequently discuss Harrison's gambling habit. It's difficult to believe that with another baby on the way, he's constantly leaving his wife and young child to go play slots. Does he feel any sense of responsibility as a father? I sighed softly as I noticed Emma's ambiguous expression. My husband must have felt the same way. He looked at Emma with a mix of concern and frustration. Is it okay for him to go to the slots while you are pregnant? Is he helping to raise John? Exactly. You know, you can always count on us if anything happens. Emma, despite having her own family, is still our precious daughter. If she is going through a difficult time, we want to do everything we can to help. She is more than welcome to return home if necessary, out of genuine concern. I tried to offer my help, but Emma simply shook her head. I will be fine if she says that. It's difficult to press the issue further. Every couple has their own way of doing things, and it is probably not appropriate for us to interfere too much. Following that, we sat in the living room, drinking tea and catching up on each other's lives. Emma mentioned that John recently began attending a programming class, despite the fact that my husband and I are not particularly computer savvy. Emma explained that programming is now a required part of the school curriculum and a popular extracurricular activity. Apparently, programming classes are more expensive than other activities, but with an affluent father like Harrison, it makes sense. What a child learns frequently becomes a topic of discussion at work. It appears that Harrison suggested John take up programming. John, for his part, is enjoying the class and proudly told us about what he's learned and what he can now do. Watching John enthusiastically discuss it, I couldn't help but wonder if Harrison, who was always out at the slots, was actually paying attention to his son's stories. After we had been talking for a while, I heard a car door close outside. It appeared that Harrison had finally returned from the slots. I'm home. Oh, hi. When Harrison entered the living room, he barely glanced at us before proceeding to his room with a little conversation. His irritated expression and the way he slammed the door behind him indicated that his time at the slots had not gone well. He acted in this manner even with us. His in-laws are in the house. One could only imagine how much worse his behavior was when we were not present. I noticed John clinging to Emma and paying close attention to Harrison's mood. It gave me an idea of how things usually went in this household. I couldn't take Emma's pitiful expression any longer and decided to speak up. Hold on. Harrison, my daughter is about to give birth. Don't you think you should spend more time supporting her rather than going to the slots? Having a grumpy husband around at such a critical time must be stressful for Emma and the baby. My remark must have struck a nerve because Harrison, with his high and mighty pride, immediately snapped back at me. This is a matter between myself and my wife. I do not believe you have any right to interfere. How dare you? Honestly, you are overprotective. It is the second child. You're worrying far too much. Excuse me. Raising a young child while pregnant is extremely difficult. Harrison's lack of understanding fueled my rage. As his temper flared, our argument heated up. My husband attempted to intervene, but Harrison and I were too worked up to stop. Emma, obviously terrified, stood motionless, saying nothing. Finally, Harrison shoved me in a fit of rage. I twisted my ankle as I fell. The pain was intense, and I couldn't stand up despite seeing myself in pain. Harrison did not apologize. He just gave us a cold stare before storming back into his room. Emma stood there, pale and flustered, unable to do anything but observe us. At my age, even minor injuries take longer to recover. I was worried about losing strength, if I couldn't move for a while with my husband's assistance. I left Emma's house and drove directly to the hospital. I couldn't stop thinking about Emma. Even as Harrison and I argued. She remained silent, never intervening to mediate my once gentle and outspoken daughter. Why did she change? Have I gone too far? As I replayed the events in my mind, I couldn't help but feel sad and uncomfortable about her lack of response. In the hospital, I was diagnosed with a sprain. When the doctor asked how it happened, I gave a vague explanation. As expected, my recovery was slower than it would have been in my younger days, and I had to spend a few weeks resting and going to the hospital frequently. Fortunately, I recovered enough to go back to the gym after a few weeks. When I returned, I found Casey to be as dedicated to her workouts as she had always been. She was surprised when I told her about my injury and expressed great concern. That day, I did a light workout, and then my husband and I decided to return to Emma's house for the first time since the injury. The last time we saw her, it was warm enough to break a sweat after just a short walk, but now the heat had subsided, and the cool autumn breeze felt refreshing. When we arrived, John and Emma greeted us as usual, but Harrison was not present. Apparently, he went out to play slots again. To be honest, I was relieved that Harrison was not present. It was still awkward between us, and I was worried that another argument would break out. Mom? Dad, it has been a while. I sincerely apologize for what happened last time. I am glad your injury has healed. Although she had already apologized via WhatsApp, she stated that she wanted to say it in person. It was not Emma's fault at all, but seeing her apologize with such a sad expression broke my heart. I had not received an apology from Harrison, the person who had caused the injury, via phone or WhatsApp. I couldn't help but wonder if my daughter would be okay living with him. We had barely finished our greetings when Emma went into the kitchen to make tea. Suddenly, she crouched down, clutching her stomach in pain. The contractions appeared irregular, but her due date was approaching. It could signal the start of labor. This is serious. Can you get the car, dear? Let us take Emma to the hospital right away. We became flustered by the unexpected turn of events and began preparing to rush her to the hospital. But unexpectedly, John dumped a bucket of ice-cold water on Emma. The splash echoed throughout the room, followed by stunned silence. Emma's clothes were soaked, and the water dripped on the floor. We stood there, mouths agape, unsure what had just occurred. Emma looked completely stunned. John clearly threw the water on purpose. This was not an accident. "Hello, what are you doing?" I scolded. But John just stood there holding the bucket, puzzled, as if he didn't understand why he was being chastised. What he said next was nearly unbelievable. But Daddy always claims it's a magical spell to make me feel better. What have you said? My husband and I were too shocked to process John's words, but we didn't have time to investigate further. Emma and the baby were our top priority. We rushed to the hospital after Emma had quickly changed clothes. When John saw his mother in pain, he appeared to be about to cry. What exactly was John's behavior all about? It didn't seem like a simple prank. It was too extreme, especially given the timing, and Emma's reaction after being doused with cold water bothered me. The car ride to the hospital was filled with concern for Emma and confusion about John's actions, even though this was her second child. Childbirth is always a life-threatening situation. For a while, I feared the worst. Emma eventually gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby who looked exactly like her. Emma lay in bed, completely exhausted. I didn't want to burden her so soon after giving birth, but after she had rested a little, I couldn't hold back any longer. By the way, before we left for the hospital, what exactly did John mean when he said this? Emma gave me a pained expression. She appeared unsure whether she should tell me, but given how serious I was, she probably realized she couldn't keep it a secret any longer. Mom, the story Emma gradually began to tell was nothing short of shocking. When Emma and Harrison first married, he was kind to her and even reduced his gambling habits from before the marriage. However, as his work became busier, he returned to gambling. When Harrison's gambling didn't go as planned, he began to vent his frustrations on Emma. He became harsh, especially when Emma, suffering from morning sickness, was unable to keep up with the housework. Instead of helping, he would berate her, saying things like, "Why can't you do it?" or "You were useless." He even turned to physical violence. This was not a one-time incident. It happened repeatedly. Just like when John unexpectedly poured cold water on Emma. Harrison frequently doused her with cold water while yelling at her. It turned out Harrison had been abusing Emma on a regular basis. John once tried to stop Harrison, but Harrison said, "When I do this, it makes Mommy feel better." This is not a bad thing. John, being young and impressionable, trusted his father. The constant barrage of negative words sapped Emma's will to resist, and she lived in fear. She hadn't told us anything because she didn't want to worry us or cause problems. Emma realized how dangerous this was for their son only after John copied Harrison and poured cold water on her. However, Emma and Harrison were no longer on equal footing in their relationship. She knew that speaking up would only lead to more violence. Emma's inability to stand up to him was unsurprising, given her long history of mistreatment. Who knows what could happen if she did? Emma had to endure abuse while caring for John and her unborn child. It must have been unbearable. She appeared to have reached her limit. Hearing all of this, I came to a realization the day I had an argument with Harrison. Emma watched with fear in her eyes. She wasn't just scared by the argument. She was terrified because of the abuse she had suffered. How could I have missed it? I deeply regretted not asking more questions when I suspected something was wrong. How could he? This is absolutely unacceptable. While Emma was in the hospital, we cared for John. I couldn't help but resent Harrison for failing to care for his own son at such a critical time. Even after Emma gave birth, Harrison only briefly visited the hospital, offering no kind words, and then left for home. I decided to confront Harrison because I was furious with the way he had treated my daughter. Fortunately, he hadn't gone out to play the slots today. He pretended not to be home at first, but his car was parked outside, so I knew he was there. After repeatedly ringing the doorbell, he finally opened it with an exasperated expression on his face. "What do you want? Emma is at the hospital right now." Even Harrison spoke to us in a rude and dismissive manner. "Harrison, what is going on here?" I inquired, telling him that I was aware of Emma's abuse and insisted that he stop immediately for the sake of both Emma and John. Regardless of how serious I was, Harrison simply smirked and refused to listen. Worse, he actually threatened me. "Enough already. Do you want me to hurt you again?" He raised his voice, becoming increasingly aggressive, as if he was about to hit me. I realized I couldn't reason with him. Continuing the argument would put me in danger. After trying to calm the situation down, I decided it was best to back down for the time being. I walked home with a heavy heart. I considered what I should do next. I told Harrison what Emma had told me when she returned home. It was certain that she would receive even worse treatment from him. I needed to find a solution before she was released from the hospital. Regardless of how bad he was, Harrison was still Emma's husband. I considered contacting the police, but doing so would require me to explain everything in detail in front of my neighbors. It would undoubtedly cause problems for Emma. It seemed unfair to subject her to additional stress, especially after having recently given birth. Feeling lost. On a trip to the gym, my husband and I asked Casey for advice. I had heard Casey mention having a daughter around Emma's age, so I hoped he could offer some advice on how to handle this situation. Despite the fact that it was such a personal matter, Casey listened intently, wincing at the horrific details and nodding sympathetically. That is a horrible story. I would love to see this guy's face. What type of man is he? I showed Casey a photo of Emma's wedding from my phone. Emma smiled so brightly in the picture that it seemed unimaginable. Now, I remembered how overjoyed I was when she told us she wanted to marry someone, and how our entire family celebrated early in their marriage. Harrison and Emma came by frequently, and we'd sit down to tea and talk about anything and everything. Harrison was thoughtful back then, checking on our well-being and even driving us around. We had a positive impression of him, but he stopped coming around. After that, Emma was the only one who paid us visits. Around that time, Emma mentioned that Harrison had always been a gambler and had recently become addicted again. I sighed as I looked at the photo, wondering how things had come to this. What would Casey think? Are you seeing this picture? When I looked up, I saw something startling. Casey, who was always smiling, now had a shocked and angry expression. I had never seen him with such an expression before. Just when I was at a loss for words, Casey said something incredible. "I know this guy." It turned out that Casey knew Harrison. What was the likelihood of such a coincidence? It's really a small world. We were stunned and asked how they knew each other, but Casey only provided vague answers. Then he offered to accompany us to talk to Harrison, which we accepted. So a few days later, we went to Harrison with Casey. To be honest, I was nervous about visiting Harrison again, but I felt reassured because Casey knew him and was a neutral third party. I was confident that Harrison would not act inappropriately with Casey. There. I pressed the doorbell at Emma's house. Harrison appeared to be at home again today. I heard Harrison's irritable voice over the intercom. "Yes, what do you want?" I told him I wanted to talk again. He responded that he had nothing to say to us, but today I couldn't back down. Emma would be discharged from the hospital shortly. I couldn't leave until Harrison sincerely apologized and promised not to commit domestic violence against her again. Determined, I repeatedly pressed the doorbell until Harrison reluctantly opened the door. "What is it? Enough already!" When Harrison saw our faces, he spat insults and acted arrogantly. But then his words came to a halt, and he wondered what had happened. I looked at his face and noticed his gaze fixed on Casey. His expression changed dramatically, and Harrison's complexion quickly turned pale. "President, what are you doing here?" We were surprised to learn that Casey was the president of Harrison's company. Emma once told me that the president had heard about Harrison's work and had high expectations for him. The Casey we'd been chatting with at the gym was the president. Emma mentioned, "What on earth have you been doing?" Casey scolded Harrison furiously. Harrison, whom the company had entrusted with its future, was not simply neglecting his family. He abused his wife. It's no surprise Casey was furious. "I'm very sorry." Harrison made a deep bow and apologized to Casey, his face pale. "There is no point in apologizing to me. You should apologize to Emma and Nancy for the trouble you've caused." The once proud Harrison was now completely crushed. His arrogance was nowhere to be found. Harrison apologized to us, with Casey leading the way. Harrison went to apologize to Emma for his actions as well. Whether sincere or not, being chastised by the president of his company made Harrison unlikely to commit domestic violence against Emma again. Was greatly relieved. Harrison's abuse became known throughout the company, and he was demoted. Abandoned by his president, his chances of advancement became slim. Harrison eventually left the company, unable to cope with the shame of his colleagues. Emma eventually divorced Harrison, despite feeling helpless and lacking the energy to fight back due to the abuse. Hearing about Casey's intervention gave her the confidence to go forward. They went to court over custody, but Harrison had neglected his family and shifted all child rearing and housework onto Emma. He did not stand a chance. Emma took custody of the children and received child support from Harrison. "Mom and Dad, thank you so much. Thank you. I can now live peacefully." Emma and her children returned to live with us, and our previously quiet home became much more lively. Every day, I am filled with joy as I watch my grandchildren grow. I'm grateful to Casey for saving my daughter from domestic violence and bringing happiness into our lives. Even now, after the ordeal has passed, Casey and I enjoy chatting when we see each other at the gym. I am thinking about inviting him over for a small thank you dinner soon. Since Emma and the kids moved in, I've been helping with childcare. However, parenting norms have changed significantly since I raised Emma, and I am constantly learning new things. For example, it was once believed that holding a baby too much would spoil them, but it is now recommended to hold them as much as they want to meet their needs. We used to soften baby food by chewing it before feeding them. However, it is now discouraged due to the risk of spreading cavity-causing bacteria. With Emma's help, I'm rediscovering the joys of raising children. Emma's mood has also improved significantly since leaving Harrison. She has always been a cheerful and energetic person by nature. I'm delighted to see her return to her true self. She expressed her gratitude that her children no longer need to tiptoe around Harrison and can live freely. Spring had arrived, and the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, marking the end of a long and painful autumn and winter. For Emma, she recently told me that she had found someone who truly understood and supported her. He has been a source of comfort for her following the emotional toll of the divorce, and he adores the children as well.